police officer John O'Keefe. The defense claims she was framed in a police cover-up.
On the scene to keep you informed at every turn.
In Dedham, Katie Benoit, NBC 10 News.
With live updates and legal analysis.
What happens then? Did the trial have to stop?
A lawyer's only as good as his or her word.
They failed miserably and they'll continue to fail.
On air, online, and on the app, NBC 10 News has the latest on the retrial of Karen Read.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gene Valicenti, joined by NBC 10's Gabrielle Caracciolo up in court, and Morjieta Derisier, who's been a legal analyst for us throughout the trial. All right, this is day one of the defense making its case. So we're at a play. We've gone through intermission. This is Act 2 starting now. Let's go ahead and roll Karen Read outside court. She really didn't say much. She was asked questions about the witnesses today, had very little to say. So we'll use that basically just to keep an eye on it while I set up what we believe to be maybe the most compelling clip. And that had to do with her attorney arguing that the state should be made to call Proctor, the lead investigator, the disgraced, damaged investigator. Why didn't the state call him? Are they trying to get the defense to call him and trick the defense into cross-examination? NBC 10's Gabrielle Caracciolo, go ahead and pick up this argument, and then we'll roll the soundbite at some point, and Morjieta can comment on it. Go ahead, Gabrielle.
Yeah, this happened in voir dire when the jury was not in the courtroom at the end of the day. So the defense is basically arguing they should be able to admit some of these texts from the former state trooper Michael Proctor, who had sent some of these lewd and obscene texts about Karen Read. And they want to admit that without having to call Proctor to the stand as a witness. Hank Brennan, the special prosecutor for the Commonwealth, is arguing that if they want to admit the texts, they have to call Michael Proctor to the stand, which he could have done during the state's case. They did that during the first trial, but they did not call him during the state's case this time.
Okay, Morjieta, they don't want to call Proctor. He's damaged goods. He was disciplined and fired. Now, before we get to playing the clip, and then I'll ask you to analyze it, just quickly give the viewing audience the definition of voir dire. I know what it is, and we all know what it is, but people joining us may not. What is it?
So voir dire is a private communication between the attorneys and the judge where they evaluate what the testimony is actually going to be before it gets to the jury. And the reason why we do that is because you don't want to confuse the jury if testimony is not going to go before them. You have to remember, they're the trier of facts. So we only want them to receive evidence that they actually going to rule on. So it's a private conversation so that nothing confusing gets to the jury at the end of the day.
And what's the Latin translation? I know it means to see. Voir.
Yeah, voir dire. I think it's prior to, or something about seeing before. Yes.
To see before the jury sees.
Yes.
All right, let's go ahead and roll this soundbite. This is now the defense attorney Yannetti making the case that the state is trying to pull a fast one. They're trying to trick us.
The whole impetus for this objection, so that we will call a witness that they do not have confidence in to call themselves. It's unheard of in a murder case that you don't call the lead investigator, but that's what's happened in this case. We should not be forced to call Michael Proctor so that Mr. Brennan can then cross-examine him and lead him through basically his entire closing argument. He is entitled to call Mr. Proctor in rebuttal. He has every right to call Mr. Proctor again. I would rest on that. Thank you.
All right, Morjieta, go ahead, take it. Well, the defense is saying the state should call him. Call him. Go ahead. If he's the lead investigator. Go ahead.
So the reason why this is important is he said it in his argument. The prosecution will be able to lead him. So when you're directing somebody on the stand, you can either ask open-ended questions or you can ask leading questions. Leading questions are just yes or no questions. And you're pretty much feeding the person what it is that you want them to respond to. So when we're talking about who gets to call Proctor, if the defense calls him, they have to ask him open-ended questions that really they're supposed to know the answer to already, right? As opposed to on cross-examination, you ask very specific questions where you can only get yes or no. So essentially what Yannetti and the defense team is saying, it's not fair that they don't get to treat him as a hostile witness and ask him the leading questions to get him to answer these direct and specific points. I don't know if Judge Cannoni is going to buy that and force the Commonwealth to call him ahead of time because it's their option, but that's what the context is. Who gets to ask those very hard, leading, direct questions?
All right. Well, counsel, what do you think? Does the defense have a point in making that argument?
I think it's a great argument that they're making. They're probably not going to win that argument, but it's true. And when you have a murder investigation, it's very rare that you not call the lead investigator. That's how you tie the whole case together. And as we've seen in the presentation of the prosecution's case, they tried to weave in through other witnesses what Trooper Proctor did, but it wasn't really as effective because you couldn't actually hear from him directly. So I don't think that their ruling is going to be allowed, but it's definitely a great argument.
Okay, day one, the state's case, they called an accident reconstructionist of their own, who's going to tell a different story than the state's accident reconstruction expert who dominated most of this week's testimony. And that is Matthew Derisier. Alan Jackson is going to talk here about triggering events. Gabrielle, you set that up for us, and then we'll roll that. What is Alan Jackson getting at with talking about triggering events? And let's try to really make it simple for the audience to understand, because this is where they all get in the weeds with timing and clocks and satellites and syncing everything up. But go ahead.
Yeah, this was the majority of today's testimony focused on these different trigger events. And they're talking about what was going on in John O'Keefe's cell phone and what was going on in Karen Read's SUV on that night, in those exact minutes down to the second. So there's a couple different things they're talking about. But the main point that the defense is trying to make with this witness is, did John O'Keefe lock his phone after the SUV recorded some sort of trigger event of Karen Read backing up? If he locked his phone 30 seconds after she backed up that car, they say that might be evidence that there wasn't a collision, that he wasn't incapacitated after she backed up the car because he was able to lock his phone. And so that's what this is all centering around.
This is just I don't know if either of you know the answer to this, but my Apple phone locks itself. It's on auto lock. Does that play any role here?
That was not brought up in...
After a certain amount of time, it goes into lock mode. Does yours do that?
I think you can set your phone to do that. That wasn't brought up in court, though, today.
Morjieta?
So unfortunately, I don't have an Apple phone, but I've heard that can happen. I think all phones can lock. I think what's really interesting is they're using an expert to counteract the other expert, right? So now we're in this battle of the experts, right? And I think, as we've seen, some of the experts from the prosecution's case had some credibility issues. They'd had issues with their credentials. So it's really about how the presentation is going to be for the defense, and if they're going to present a more cleaner expert for the jury to digest that information.
But the significance, they're arguing that he locked the phone, and if he did that, it came 30 seconds after the so-called bump in the Lexus, and he was conscious and alert to lock the phone. Am I following this?
I mean, that sounds about right. It'll just be interesting to see if this expert is going to relay that same information or not, to the jury. It's all very technical at this point.
Well, let's roll the soundbite and listen to Alan Jackson. He had first crack at the accident reconstruction expert called for the defense, Matthew Derisier. Go ahead.
No. Does it mean that the vehicle impacted with a pedestrian?
No. He complains that we have not called Michael Proctor. I think that's the whole.
All right, we'll let our producer just get those sound bites in order. I've got defense witness Matthew Derisier, Alan Jackson talking about triggering events. Go ahead and roll that. It won't roll. All right, happens sometimes. Computer doesn't want to cooperate with us. So listen, that's our cue. It's a Friday. We'll wrap it there. I think we've explained it, though, plenty as to what this argument was about. And we'll see if we can't get that fixed for our later debrief. In the meantime, we'll hold it there. Morjieta, thank you for joining us. NBC 10's Gabrielle Caracciolo. We'll see you on the news tonight, and I'll see you there, too. Have a good weekend.